Have you ever noticed how easily people can control your day just by changing their tone, ignoring your message, or giving you a strange look? One minute you're calm, and the next you're anxious, overthinking, or angry. It's like your emotions belong to them, not you. But the moment you stop letting their moods decide your emotions, that's when everything changes. That's when you take your peace back. It's almost unsettling how quickly our internal world can be hijacked by someone else's energy. A raised eyebrow, a cold silence, a passive-aggressive word. Suddenly, we're spiraling, not because of what happened, but because of what we let it mean. The truth is, most of the time, we're not reacting to the world itself, but to the version of it, shaped by the emotions of others. Think of it like a dog chasing a stick, not out of desire for the stick, but because someone keeps throwing it. Or imagine a bird forgetting it can fly simply because it's lived too long in a cage, even though the door has been open all along. That's how it feels when you let your emotional compass be guided by others. You're not free. You're reacting on command, sometimes without even realizing it. And then there's the river forced into a narrow bottle. It spills over, not because it's flawed, but because it was never meant to be confined. Emotions, like water, are powerful when they flow freely in their natural course. Letting someone else steer your emotions? That's like letting them build the dam. You might think you're being calm, cooperative. But are you really, or are you being controlled? Because while they're busy trying to stir your peace, you still have a choice. React or rise, bend or breathe. That choice is where your freedom lives. And when you stop feeding their need to manipulate your mood, something subtle but powerful happens. They lose their grip and you find your center. So what really happens when you stop letting people control your emotions, without yelling, without arguing, and without even needing to speak? Stay with this, because the final truth will shift how you see it all. But first, let's look at a story. A quiet, striking story. The story of Elias. Elias had always been easy to read, and even easier to manipulate. When someone frowned at him, he'd rush to apologize, even when he didn't know what he'd done. When someone he cared about pulled away, he'd bend over backwards, trying to win them back. He adjusted, softened, over-explained, all to keep the peace. People called him kind, thoughtful, so considerate. But deep down, Elias understood what they actually appreciated, how easily they could pull at his strings and get a reaction. He hadn't been born this way. No, he had learned early that people reward those who dance when guilt is thrown like a drumbeat. So he adapted. He became like a circus elephant, massive in strength, yet conditioned to lift his foot every time someone clapped. Until one day, something changed. It wasn't a dramatic breakup. There was no big betrayal, no shouting match. Just a slow, quiet ache that grew inside him. That night, Elias stayed up rewording an apology for something he hadn't even done. He barely slept. And when morning came and the sunlight crept across his room, he caught his reflection in the mirror. His eyes looked hollow. His spirit looked small. And in that silent moment, something inside him whispered, "This isn't peace. This is performance." Later that same week, Elias visited his uncle, a wildlife conservationist, who had once rescued animals mistreated in traveling circuses. They walked slowly past a sanctuary enclosure, talking quietly. But then Elias stopped. What he saw rooted him to the ground. An enormous elephant standing still while tourists clapped and waved. It didn't move, didn't dance, didn't lift a foot, just stood there, calm, unmoved, sovereign. Why won't it react? Elias asked, his curiosity sharp and searching. His uncle smiled knowingly and replied, "Because for years it danced. Every time someone clapped. But one day, it realized it wasn't born to perform for others. It was born to roam freely, to live on its own terms. So now, it only moves when it chooses. Those words struck a chord deep within Aurelius. In that moment, something inside him began to shift, not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, steady change. From that day forward, he no longer chased approval when someone rolled their eyes his way. When silence was used as a weapon to punish or unsettle him, he resisted the urge to fill it with anxious words. Instead, he stopped responding to emotional bait. He stopped defending every little move he made. He stopped letting other people's moods write the script of his life. Some people whispered that he had grown distant. Others remarked, "You've changed." But the ones who truly understood, who respected him for who he was becoming, leaned in closer, not because he danced whenever they asked, but precisely because he didn't have to. Because when you stop letting people control your emotions, you don't lose your heart. You simply stop handing it over. And from that moment on, you move not when others clap, but when your own soul says, "Walk." Before we dive into the first lesson, if you find these reflections helpful, I encourage you to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with the latest insights and stories. Let's begin. Number 1. You reclaim your inner power. Let's talk about one of the most liberating shifts you can ever experience. What really happens when you stop letting people control your emotions? It's not instant. At first, it feels strange because you're so used to reacting. Snapping back when someone disrespects you. Shutting down when you're ignored. Feeling drained when chaos surrounds you. It's almost automatic. Someone else moves, and you flinch. They pull away, and you chase. They criticize, and you shrink. But then there comes a moment. Quiet, calm, you stop. You don't react. You don't absorb their negativity. You don't engage in the emotional trap. And that's when something powerful happens. Here's the truth. The moment you stop reacting to every insult, every guilt trip, every mood swing thrown your way, you begin to reclaim ownership of your inner world. You stop being an emotional puppet, tangled in the strings of others' behavior. You stop letting their opinions shape your self-worth. What once triggered you now simply passes through like wind flowing through open hands. It's not that you don't care anymore. It's that you've grown strong enough to choose when and how you respond. This is where ancient Stoic wisdom steps in. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And he was absolutely right. You cannot control what others do. You cannot control who is rude, who is distant, who is moody, or who tries to manipulate you. It didn't move, didn't dance, didn't lift a foot, just stood there, calm, unmoved, sovereign. Why won't it react? Aurelius asked, his curiosity sharp and searching. His uncle smiled knowingly and replied, "Because for years, it danced every time someone clapped." But one day, it realized it wasn't born to perform for others. It was born to roam freely, to live on its own terms. So now, it only moves when it chooses. Those words struck a chord deep within Aurelius. In that moment, something inside him began to shift, not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, steady change. From that day forward, he no longer chased approval when someone rolled their eyes his way. When silence was used as a weapon to punish or unsettle him, he resisted the urge to fill it with anxious words. Instead, he stopped responding to emotional bait. He stopped defending every little move he made. He stopped letting other people's moods write the script of his life. Some people whispered that he had grown distant. Others remarked, "You've changed." But the ones who truly understood, who respected him for who he was becoming, leaned in closer, not because he danced whenever they asked, but precisely because he didn't have to. Because when you stop letting people control your emotions, you don't lose your heart. You simply stop handing it over. And from that moment on, you move not when others clap, but when your own soul says, walk. Before we dive into the first lesson, if you find these reflections helpful, I encourage you to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with the latest insights and stories. Let's begin. Number 1. You reclaim your inner power. Let's talk about one of the most liberating shifts you can ever experience. What really happens when you stop letting people control your emotions? It's not instant. At first, it feels strange because you're so used to reacting. Snapping back when someone disrespects you. Shutting down when you're ignored. Feeling drained when chaos surrounds you. It's almost automatic. Someone else moves, and you flinch. They pull away, and you chase. They criticize, and you shrink. But then there comes a moment, quiet, calm, you stop. You don't react. You don't absorb their negativity. You don't engage in the emotional trap. And that's when something powerful happens. Here's the truth. The moment you stop reacting to every insult, every guilt trip, every mood swing thrown your way, you begin to reclaim ownership of your inner world. You stop being an emotional puppet, tangled in the strings of others' behavior. You stop letting their opinions shape your self-worth. What once triggered you now simply passes through like wind flowing through open hands. It's not that you don't care anymore. It's that you've grown strong enough to choose when and how you respond. This is where ancient Stoic wisdom steps in. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And he was absolutely right. You cannot control what others do. You cannot control who is rude, who is distant, who is moody, or who tries to manipulate you. But you can control what you do next. You can control your peace, your focus, your clarity. And when you finally accept that truth, not just intellectually, but deep in your heart, you stop handing your emotional power to people who never deserved it in the first place. Imagine the freedom in that realization. It's like taking back the keys to your own mind and deciding who gets to step inside. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Natalie, used to let one coworker ruin her entire day. He was passive-aggressive, always making sly remarks, constantly challenging her confidence in subtle, almost invisible ways. She would come home exhausted, replaying every conversation in her mind, wondering if she'd said the wrong thing or if she'd missed some hidden insult. Then one day, Natalie decided she was done. The next time he tried to bait her, she simply looked him in the eye, smiled gently, and said nothing. No reaction. No explanation. Just calm, steady silence. And that moment changed everything. She realized his power over her had never been real. It was borrowed, handed to him every time she reacted. So, how do you reclaim your emotional power? First, pause before you respond. Just breathe. Feel the moment instead of rushing to fill it. Second, stop internalizing other people's behavior. What they do is a reflection of who they are, not a mirror of your worth or your reality. And finally, remind yourself every single day, your emotions are your responsibility. No one else's. At the end of the day, peace isn't found by trying to control others. It's found by mastering yourself. And when you stop letting others dictate how you feel, that's when you truly begin to rise steady, strong, free. Number 2, manipulators lose their grip. Let's talk about what really happens when someone tries to manipulate you and fails. Manipulation rarely begins with fireworks. It starts quietly, almost unnoticed. A guilt trip here, a sarcastic comment there, a carefully timed silence that hangs heavy in the air. Manipulators don't storm through the front door. Instead, they inch past your boundaries, slowly and deliberately. Until you don't even realize the line has been crossed. They rely on one thing to keep their game going, your emotional reaction. That's their currency. But the moment you stop giving them that reaction, something starts to shift. And it's not you, it's them. Here's the truth. Emotional control is the currency of manipulators. When you remain centered, calm, grounded, and aware, they can no longer push your buttons. They will try, of course. They'll say things they know once triggered you. They'll test old patterns, hoping you'll still flinch, still justify, still explain. But when you simply breathe, observe, and refuse to engage, their power begins to crumble. Because manipulation only works if you hand over your emotional remote control. And once your peace becomes non-negotiable, once it truly belongs to you and you alone, manipulators lose their grip completely. This is where Stoic wisdom truly shines. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In other words, don't play their game. Don't respond to their chaos with chaos of your own. When someone tries to control you emotionally, your greatest strength lies in stillness, not cold silence, not passive aggression, but calm, clear clarity. This is the kind of clarity that calmly says, "I see what you're doing, and I no longer accept it." Because the moment you stop reacting, their own words bounce right back to them, echoing in the empty space you leave behind. And that silence? That is accountability. Let me tell you about someone. Let's call her Rachel. Rachel had a friend, Leah, who had a habit of making Rachel feel guilty for simply setting boundaries. If Rachel didn't respond to a message quickly enough, Leah would post passive-aggressive quotes online, carefully crafted to sting without naming names. If Rachel said no to plans, Leah would bring it up later joking, but not really, making Rachel feel as if she owed an explanation. This constant emotional drain wore Rachel down over time, until one day, she simply stopped explaining herself. She stopped defending her choices. When Leah made a snide remark, Rachel just smiled gently and smoothly changed the subject. No anger, no need for justification. Just peace. Leah stumbled, unsure how to provoke the same reaction. The comments kept coming, but with less force and less frequency. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Why? Because without Rachel's emotional energy to feed on, there was nothing left to manipulate that. So how do you take back control in situations like this? First, notice the patterns of manipulation. Recognize when someone is trying to push your buttons. Second, stop explaining yourself to people who are already committed to misunderstanding you. You don't owe endless justifications to those who refuse to listen. Third, protect your peace as if it were sacred, because it truly is. At the end of the day, manipulation only works when you react. But when your peace becomes untouchable, their control becomes meaningless. You stop being the pawn and start becoming the master of your own emotional world. If you've watched this far, please don't forget to leave a comment saying, "Thank God," and give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Your support means the world to me and motivates me to keep creating meaningful, inspiring content. I hope you find inspiration here and that we continue learning and growing together. Thank you sincerely for your support. Number 3. You start thinking more clearly. Now, let's explore something that often goes unnoticed. What really happens to your mind when you finally stop letting emotions run the show? When you're constantly reacting, your judgment becomes clouded, foggy, unclear. You say things you don't mean. You agree to things you later regret. You read too deeply into silences and miss what's actually being said. Emotion, when left unchecked, acts like a distorted lens. It exaggerates, distorts, and paints situations in extremes, making mountains out of molehills. But once you stop reacting to every comment, every mood swing, every glance, once you stop handing over your emotional state to others, you begin to see things clearly for what they really are. Here's the truth. Emotions aren't bad, but when they lead your every response, they can cloud your thinking. That cloudiness often steers you toward decisions fueled by fear, resentment, pride, or impulse rather than wisdom and clarity. But here's the turning point. The moment you pause, the moment you take a breath before speaking, assess the situation. Before acting and reflect before reacting, clarity slowly begins to return. You start noticing a subtle but powerful gap, the difference between what someone says and how you interpret it. Gradually, you stop taking things so personally. You begin to separate your feelings from the facts. Suddenly, your decisions become sharper, more rational, and deeply grounded in truth, not just fleeting emotion. This is where Stoic psychology becomes a vital compass. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." And he was absolutely right. It's not the event itself. It's your interpretation of it. It's not the silence that hurts, but the story you tell yourself about that silence. When you learn to question those stories, instead of reacting immediately to them, that's when your mind begins to sharpen. You start thinking with a broader perspective. You make decisions based on your core values, not your fluctuating moods. Let me share a story that illustrates this well. There was a man I once met, let's call him Brian, who used to be impulsive at work. If someone disagreed with him, he would instantly become defensive. At home, if his partner seemed distant, his mind spiraled into overthinking and doubt. Every emotion triggered a reaction. Every disagreement felt like a personal attack. But Brian decided to make a change. He began journaling, studying Stoicism, and most importantly, practicing one simple habit: pausing. That pause changed everything. Instead of replying instantly, Brian started asking himself, is this true? Is this really about me, or is this just a passing wave? The more he practiced this pause, the clearer his thinking became. He stopped making assumptions. He began truly listening. His decisions improved, not only at work, but also in his personal life. So, how do you start thinking more clearly? First, create space between the stimulus, the event or comment, and your response. Give yourself that pause. Second, question your interpretations. Not everything you feel is an objective fact. Sometimes your mind fills in blanks with stories that may not be true. And third, trust that clarity comes when emotion no longer clouds your lens. At the end of the day, your greatest power is not just staying calm, it's thinking clearly. And that clarity begins the moment you stop letting emotion take the wheel. Number 4, you become unshakably calm. Let's talk about a kind of calm that people can't shake, the kind that unsettles even those who once rattled you. When you let others control your emotions, your peace is always at the mercy of someone else's behavior. If they ignore you, you panic. If they lash out, you break. If they guilt trip you, you shrink. You become a leaf tossed on the winds of other people's moods. But when you stop giving them that control, when you stop reacting and start observing, something shifts. The chaos that once swept you away now passes by like wind gliding over still water. You're no longer tossed around by every wave of emotion or external disturbance. Instead, you're centered and rooted calm in the eye of the storm. And those who once relied on your emotional reactions start to realize something crucial. They've lost their hold on you. Here's the truth. People who manipulate through silence, guilt, or anger are not seeking genuine communication. What they really want is control. They aim to pull you into their relentless dance of reaction. But when you no longer flinch, when their silence doesn't make you chase, their guilt no longer makes you bend, and their anger fails to drag you into conflict, they are left dancing alone in the empty space of their own making. Your calm becomes your shield, your silence becomes your sword. That kind of stillness, that emotional discipline, can unsettle even those who once depended on your chaos to validate their power. It's like standing firm in the eye of a storm, while everything around you rages and spins. This is precisely where Stoic wisdom offers invaluable guidance. Heraclitus once said, "To be even-minded is the greatest virtue." And how true that is. Calm isn't weakness. It is strength under control. It is the extraordinary ability to stand in the middle of someone else's emotional tempest and not be blown off course. When you master this, your entire life shifts. You stop fearing other people's moods. You no longer tiptoe around tension or uncertainty. Instead, you walk into any room carrying the same energy you would, while strolling peacefully through a forest, fully aware, alert, but deeply rooted in peace. Let me share a story. There was a woman named Jessica. She had a sister notorious for emotional blow-ups. Holidays, birthdays, even simple phone calls could turn into emotional landmines. Jessica used to get drawn into every explosion, trying to explain, trying to fix, trying to soothe. It drained her completely, but one year, something changed. When her sister lashed out, Jessica responded differently. No yelling, no frantic explanations, just calm, steady stillness. That calm threw her sister off balance because there was nothing to push against anymore. The storm lost its fuel. Eventually, even the harshest outbursts softened because the emotional reaction they craved wasn't there. Jessica had stopped being a participant in the chaos. Instead, she became an anchor, a steady presence amid the storm. So how do you become unshakably calm? First, detach your peace from other people's behavior. Your calm must be your own, not borrowed from or dependent on others. Second, don't confuse silence with surrender. Sometimes this is strategic. Choose a way to preserve your power rather than give it away. And third, understand this truth. Calm is not passive. It's power in its purest, most refined form. At the end of the day, people will always test your peace. They will throw storms at you. But once you master your calm, their storms lose their strength. You don't just stay grounded, you become the ground itself. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 5, your self-worth stops depending on others. Let's talk about one of the most profound transformations. That happens when you stop letting others control your emotions. Your self-worth stops being up for negotiation. You no longer inflate or deflate based on praise or criticism. You stop seeking permission from others to feel good about yourself. Instead, your confidence begins to come from something much deeper, something unshakable. Not applause, not validation, but alignment. And when that profound shift finally happens, you no longer rise and fall based on someone else's fleeting opinion of you. You stand firmly on your own ground. You know who you are, not because others have told you, but because you have already decided for yourself. Here's the truth. When you base your value on external validation, your self-worth becomes fragile, brittle like glass. A single compliment may lift you high, but a single criticism can shatter you into doubt and confusion. You start living your life chasing likes, approval, and applause, endlessly overthinking every interaction. You catch yourself asking, did I do enough? Was I impressive? Did they like me? But when you stop outsourcing your worth to others, when you stop handing people the mirror that reflects back who you think you should be, you reclaim your power. Because who you truly are is not a popularity contest or a public performance. It is a quiet, unwavering knowing. It's self-respect lived consistently, even when no one is watching. This is where the wisdom of Stoic philosophy lights the path. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." The same is true for validation. The moment you stop craving others' approval, you stop living in emotional poverty. You realize that you are already enough, not perfect, not without flaws, but whole, with or without applause. And that kind of self-worth, it cannot be shaken because it is no longer on loan. It belongs to you completely. Let me share a story. A woman I knew, let's call her Erin, was a high achiever, always polished, always praised. But beneath that confident exterior hid a secret addiction to approval. If Erin wasn't complimented, she felt invisible. If someone criticized her, even gently, she would spiral into self-doubt. Then something shifted. A mentor posed a simple but powerful question. What if you're still valuable, even when no one says so? That question hit her deeply. Erin began journaling, meditating, and showing up fully for herself, even on days when no one noticed. Slowly but surely, her confidence stopped rising and falling with the external noise. She started wearing what she loved, speaking without rehearsing, and most importantly, validating herself from within. So, how do you stop depending on others for your worth? First, realize that while validation feels sweet, it's not necessary for your happiness or self-esteem. Second, notice how often you adjust yourself, your words, or your actions just to be liked, and then choose to stop. Third, build daily rituals that affirm who you truly are, not who you think you should be to impress others. At the end of the day, your worth isn't up for debate, not in likes, not in opinions, not in applause. When you stop chasing validation, you don't become arrogant. You become free. Number 6, you become emotionally independent. Let's talk about one of the quietest but most profound transformations that happens when you stop letting others control your emotions. You become emotionally independent. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop outsourcing your emotional state to other people's actions. You stop needing someone else to make you feel worthy, happy, or safe. And most importantly, you stop allowing their bad moods, harsh words, or toxic behavior to dictate the state of your inner world. Your emotions cease to be merely reactive impulses. Instead, they become deliberate choices, carefully considered responses rather than automatic reactions. This kind of freedom, the freedom to master your emotional landscape, is something most people never truly experience. Here's the hard truth. Many of us grow up believing that love means emotional entanglement, that our feelings must rise and fall in sync with those around us. We think that if someone we care about is upset, we are obligated to be upset too. If someone treats us poorly, it's expected that we spiral down with hurt and anger. But this is not love. This is emotional dependence. Emotional independence means something very different. It means feeling deeply and authentically, yet not being enslaved by those feelings. You are no longer a puppet dancing to the tune of someone else's strings. Instead, you become the author of your own emotional life, and nobody else ever gets to steal your pen. This is where the wisdom of Stoic psychology reveals its most profound lesson. Epictetus taught, freedom is the name of virtue, slavery of vice. None is free who is not his own master. Emotional independence is exactly that, is becoming your own master. When you are no longer emotionally reactive, no one can manipulate you through guilt, silence, praise, or pressure. You gain the power to decide what truly matters. You get to choose your response. You become calm amid the storm, centered in the chaos, and whole in your solitude. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this beautifully. There's a man I know, let's call him Daniel. For years, Daniel lived at the mercy of his partner's emotional tides. When she was joyful, he felt alive and uplifted. But when she grew cold or distant, he spiraled into despair and anxiety. His happiness was simply a reflection of her mood. After enduring years of this emotional whiplash, Daniel began to make a quiet but profound shift. Instead of constantly asking, "How do they feel about me?" he started asking himself, "How do I feel about me?" He learned to pause before reacting. He discovered joy in small, solitary moments, reading a book, walking in nature, sitting quietly with his thoughts. Step by step, Daniel became emotionally independent. The emotional ups and downs of those around him no longer dictated his day or stole his peace. For the first time, Daniel felt something deeper and stronger than love. He felt freedom. So, how can you cultivate this kind of emotional independence? First, stop waiting for others to validate your emotions or your worth. Your feelings are yours alone to own. Second, practice pausing. Create a space between the stimulus and your response. That space is where your power lies. And third, build your joy and peace in places no one else can reach, your own inner sanctuary of strength and contentment. At the end of the day, emotional independence does not mean detachment or coldness. It means freedom. You still love deeply, you still care, but your peace is no longer something you lend to others or borrow from them. It belongs to you and you alone. If you believe this video can help others, please give it a like. It helps the YouTube algorithm. Share this message with more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more empowering content coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will definitely reply. Number 7. People, start respecting you differently. Let's explore the shift that happens not just inside you, but in how others see and treat you. The moment you stop letting others control your emotions, people begin to respect you differently. It's subtle at first. The tone they use when they speak to you changes almost imperceptibly. The way they test your boundaries slows down. They stop pushing for reactions because they've realized that now their usual tactics no longer work. Your calm becomes something different. It's not cold or distant. It's deeply rooted, steady, and unshakable. Your presence quietly declares, "I know who I am." And that kind of self-assurance is not something others can manipulate. It demands respect. Here's the truth. People don't truly respect those who can be easily thrown off balance. Sure, some may enjoy the control they wield when you react unpredictably or emotionally, but genuine admiration? That belongs only to those who stand firm. When you're reactive, when every word, every silence, every gesture from someone else sends you spinning, others can sense it instantly. Unfortunately, some will even exploit this, testing your limits again and again. But the moment you stop reacting, the moment your energy remains calm and still while there's rises or falls, everything changes. They pause, they notice, they adjust. Suddenly, they're not dealing with someone they can easily sway or manipulate. They're facing someone grounded, someone present and centered. This shift in dynamic is powerful because it disrupts the old patterns of control and opens the door to mutual respect. This is exactly where Stoic philosophy sheds its brightest light. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what kind of person you want to be, then do what you have to do." Respect is not something you demand from others. It's something you embody naturally. When you walk consistently in your values, when you speak with clarity and hold your peace even under pressure, people begin to treat you differently, not because you told them to, but because your energy leaves no room for anything less. Let me share a story to illustrate this. There was a woman I worked with. Let's call her Rachel. Early in her career, she was known for being overly accommodating. She would apologize before even speaking, fold under confrontation, and rarely assert herself. In meetings, people often cut her off, overlooked her ideas, and sometimes even took credit for her work. But then something inside Rachel shifted. She started reading Stoic texts, practicing journaling before reacting, and pausing to think before replying. Gradually, she stopped chasing approval and began owning her voice. One day, during a meeting, someone tried to talk over her again. But this time, Rachel didn't flinch. She held her eye contact, allowed the silence to grow, and then calmly, clearly, and unshaken, finished her sentence. The entire room shifted in that moment. From that day forward, people spoke to her differently. They interrupted her less. Why? Because Rachel was no longer reactive, she was grounded. And grounded people command a different kind of respect. So, how do you begin to shift the way people see you? First, stop reacting to their provocations. Second, stand firm in your truth without aggression or defensiveness. And third, let your presence calm, confident, and composed speak louder than any words or defenses you might offer. At the end of the day, when your emotions stop being public property to be toyed with, your power becomes visible to all. You don't have to demand respect. Instead, you naturally become someone who receives it. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights.